We're going to go ahead and get started today. In the interest of time, we want to get through our stuff. We do have a special Supreme Court meeting in here after the tax meeting is out. So you will be out here by 5, and I'll try to get you out even earlier than that so they'll have time to come in and get set up for their program. First item was always requests for bill introductions. Do we have any requests? Yes, please come forward and state your name.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. My name is Kurt Ratzlaff, and I'm here on behalf of the Kansas chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I'm here to request an introduction of 25 RS 0405. This bill would reauthorize and update an income tax credit for landowners who choose to participate in qualified habitat management programs and for those who also open their land to public access. And I'll stand for questions.
Okay. Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Any objection? Seeing none, the request is approved. Thank you. Are there any further requests for bill introductions? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I have 2 bill introductions. The first is on behalf of Kansas Pet Advocates. It is 25 RS 0184, and this is a sales tax exemption for nonprofit shelters and rescues licensed under the Kansas Pet Animal Act.
Okay. Committee, any questions or objections? Seeing none, the request is approved.
And the second bill is on behalf of Friends of Historic Preservation. This is 25 RS 0631, and it amends the transferability of the Kansas Housing Investor Tax Credit Act. And it was also recommended by the Special Committee on Available and Affordable Housing this fall.
Okay, thank you. And I was watching for this one. I think Chairman Tarwater and I were working on this together, so thank you for that introduction. Committee, are there any requests, any questions or objection? Seeing none, that request is approved. Thank you. Are there any further requests for bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move on to our first item of business for the day, and that is a briefing. I'd like to welcome to committee Bob Kent. He is with the Property Valuation Division and has a presentation on the Kansas appraisals. Welcome to committee. Bob, is your light on the mic?
Sorry.
There we go. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Chairman Smith and members of the committee, thank you for having me today. I was asked to come and give a little overview of the appraisal process and kind of what county appraisers do out there in these 105 counties. So I'm going to start off with the computer assisted mass appraisal system, which we refer to as the CAMA system. We have a CAMA system installed statewide in all 105 counties. So same system out there in 105 counties. That's kind of rare. Throughout the United States, there's probably less than 5 states that have all counties or all jurisdictions on one system. So pretty rare for the United States anyway. We have a lot of jurisdictions that are county jurisdictions. Some of them are cities. Some of them are even township jurisdictions. The CAMA system that's installed in the 105 counties is referred to as the Assessment and Tax Pro. It's developed by Tyler Technologies. It's formerly known, or may also be known as the Orion system. They've changed their naming a little bit. But this system incorporates the Marshall Swift cost system. The Marshall Swift cost system is the same system that banks use, fee appraisers use, insurance companies use. So county appraisers are on par with these other entities from step one anyway. And then I'll talk a little bit about the appointment and the regulation and oversight of the Kansas County Appraiser. County appraisers are appointed by the Board of County Commission to 4-year terms. We are currently in the fourth year of the current term, and this term will expire on June 30th, 2025. So we'll have a new appointment period on July 1. To be appointed as a county appraiser, the appraiser shall have at least 3 years of mass appraisal experience and be qualified by the Director of Property Valuation as an eligible county appraiser pursuant to KSA 19-30. All appraisers are regulated by the state of Kansas and the Department of Revenue. Making a county appraiser become an eligible by the director means they have to pass an eligibility exam that covers mass appraisal, the approaches to value, and the laws of the state of Kansas. Originally, the applicant would have to have 200 hours of original or of education, and that I think that is spelled out through Kansas Administrative Regulation 93-6 through 1 or 6-1 through 5. And the county appraiser, if they meet the requirements of the 200 hours, the 3 years of mass appraisal experience, they also have to sit through a case study, and a residential case study and a commercial case study, and to achieve an RMA or a registered mass appraiser designation. Or they could also be a generally certified appraiser and take the steps to be on the eligibility list by taking the eligibility exam. PVD reviews the work of the appraiser's office each year for compliance and compliance with Kansas law and appraisal standards. We perform a procedural compliance review on all the phases that they go through to determine the final values. We also do a ratio study, which is a statistical compliance test. And so those two things added together is what's referred to as substantial compliance. And that's what we use to determine compliance. And it says down there below, I think there's a link to a website. The results over maybe the last 10 or 12 years can be found on our website. I guess it's 2010 through 2023 is what this says. The appraisers, some of the things we look at out there as far as procedural compliance is concerned is USPAP, or the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, which they have to adhere to. The scope of work, the sales file, all the sales SBQs are filtered into the county appraiser's offices. They collect those SBQs. And they validate sales, and we check the process of them validating sales, and we review the reinspection process, the land valuation, sale trending, depreciation, the approaches to value, the cost approach, the sales comparison approach, the income approach, agricultural use reviews, mapping, and statutory items. And again, appraisals are prepared in conformance with USPAP. USPAP is designed to promote and maintain a high level of public trust in appraisal practice. It provides rules on competency, ethics, scope of work, record keeping, jurisdictional exceptions. And then there is also standards embedded in USPAP that provide requirements for appraisals and appraisal review and the manner in which each is communicated. Excuse me. The duties of the county appraiser, county appraiser inventories and maintains records of all property within the county. We just kind of went through some of that stuff in compliance, but In the system, they collect ownership information, situs and legal addresses, maps, improvements, legal descriptions, appeals, photos, assessment data, information on exemptions, and again, sales data and SVQs. Annually, they annually supervise the listing of all real and personal property except state appraised utilities as of January 1. January 1 would be the valuation date in the state of Kansas. The one exception to all those properties, well, I guess annually values are at fair market value, and the one exception to that would be land devoted to agricultural use, which is based on its productivity or its use value. They maintain the sales files, SVQ information, which is the basis for the appraisals in large part. They list and value property in a uniform and equal manner. They are required to reinspect every property once in a 6-year period. So they're out there every year reviewing properties and verifying data, updating data if needed. And they also review property annually during the final review process. They notify each property owner annually of the appraised value and the property owner's appeal rights. They conduct hearings, informal hearings after the CVNs are sent. Once the hearing process has concluded, they prepare and certify final value rolls to the county clerk. And then this is a pretty high level information here, but after they are completed with that information, they begin the process all over again. So it's an annual cycle. So we do it every year. A little bit about the appraised value, classification, and assessed value. The county appraiser calculates and provides an estimate of fair market value as of on January 1 of each tax year. Fair market value is defined in statute in KSA 79-503A. It says fair market value means the amount in terms of money that a well-informed buyer is justified in paying, and a well-informed seller is justified in accepting for property in an open and competitive market, assuming that the parties are acting without undue compulsion. So, really what this is saying is we want buyers and sellers to be knowledgeable. We want the properties to be exposed on the open market, everybody to have knowledge that they're for sale, and it'd be nice, if the buyers had knowledge of the local markets. That's how we get market transactions. There's 3 approaches to value. There's a cost approach, a sales comparison approach, and an income approach. The cost approach is the market value of an improved parcel. It can be estimated as the sum of the land value and the estimated depreciated value of the improvements. The sales comparison approach, it's the market value of a property as it's related to prices of comparable competitive properties recently sold in the marketplace. The formula for that is the sale price, basically the sale prices of comparables are adjusted to the subject property being appraised to be able to make them more like the subject property. And we look at the adjusted sale prices and are able to formulate a value or reconcile a value for the sales comparison approach. So we're using a small set of sales to be able to use, to be able to compare to the subject property form of value and making those adjustments accordingly. The income approach is the value of income-producing property. When I say income-producing property, I mean property that's being rented, not the per se the value of a business. It's the income that's being produced by the property, and it's estimated by converting anticipated benefits, meaning income or rent arising from the ownership of the income-producing property. The formula for that is taking the net operating income divided by the capitalization rate, and that gets you to by doing that, we transform a net income into a value, an estimate of value. So that's a brief overview of the three approaches. The classification and assessed value, the county appraiser assigns the proper classification based on the actual use of the parcel. And the county appraiser calculates the assessed value percentage of the market value. I've given you, I think, the assessment rates for all the different types of property. Residential is 11.5%. Vacant lots are 12%. Nonprofit properties, not-for-profit, are 12%. Commercial property is 25%. Ag buildings are 25%. I see a typo there. Agricultural land should be 30%. I apologize. The other classification is, and remember, the agricultural land's based on use value, so it's 30% of use value. And the other classification is 30%. The one that's not listed there as far as real estate is concerned is state appraised utilities, and that's because the county appraiser has no involvement in state appraised utility properties. It's all done through the Division of Property Valuation, and it's based on unit valuation. And so I just thought I'd bring that up. I don't think that's on your sheet. Taxes. A little bit about taxes. I probably don't need to tell anybody about taxes. This is what this committee deals with a lot. But the tax rate is equal to the budget being generated by the local authorities and divided by the assessed value that's being generated in the county. So if the budget is $50 million and the assessed value is $400 million, that's a simple calculation. We can get a tax rate by dividing the budget divided by the assessed value, and that number, if we use 50 million and 400 million, is 0.125. That's a tax rate. If we convert that to mills, if we multiply it by 1,000, we can convert it to mills, and so that'd be 125 mills. And there's an example for you there in the middle of the page. And then lastly, I wanted to touch a little bit on valuation appeals. Any taxpayer may appeal to the county appraiser within 30 days after the date of mailing of CVNs, as outlined in KSA 79-1460. The county appraiser shall arrange to hold an informal meeting. It's the duty of the county appraiser to initiate production of evidence to substantiate the valuation of such property, including the summary of the reasons the valuation of the property has been increased over the previous year, any assumptions used by the county appraiser to determine the value of the property, a description of the individual property characteristics, provide property-specific valuation records, and conclusions. The taxpayer shall be provided with the opportunity to review the data sheets applicable to the property value, to the valuation approach utilized for the subject property, and the county appraiser shall not increase the appraised valuation of the property as a result of the informal meeting. There is a secondary appeal opportunity if the informal appeal is missed or they don't get filed in time, and that is a payment under protest opportunity set forth in KSA 79/2005, where they can pay their taxes under protest and appeal the property valuation at the time of the tax payment. Could be the first half, could be a whole. That's what I have for you today. I was asked to keep this pretty simple and short, so it's pretty high level. And I guess I'll stand for questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. That was an excellent presentation. Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if there has been a recent sale of a property, and by recent I'm saying within the past year, and there have been no improvements made to the property within that year, how much consideration is given to what amount was paid for the property relative to its valuation?
Well, I think what the appraiser would first do is look at the sale to see if it was a valid sale. Is it something that we should use in the appraisal process? And if so, I think, you know, I can't speak for, you know, counties look at things a little bit differently. But if there's been no changes, even if there has been changes, if the changes were made after the sale, they can still use the sale. They just have to look at it at the, you know, what sold. Look at the condition and of the property at the time it sold. It still can still be used. So, but I would say there's probably a good chance there's you know, there'll be a lot of weight put on it. I mean, in most cases, you know, there's a, you know, these small counties, they struggle with sales. They don't have a lot of data out there. They'll go back 3 or 4 years to get enough sales to calibrate a model. When you talk about calibrating these models, we're trying to set up a model that will value a universe of properties instead of just one, where maybe a fee appraiser goes out and, you know, they'll look at one property and they're trying to value one property. But, you know, I hope that answers your question. I don't know what else to really say, but yeah, I think.
Well, I guess my point is that unless it's something like involving your brother-in-law or whatever, the only true value of anything is what somebody else is willing to pay for it. I mean, is that factor in much or at all?
Sure. I mean, the sale is what somebody paid for, right?
Right.
Right. So
And
yeah.
that's what the value of it is.
But okay, so I would say this. I would say, so you're talking about a property selling. Should that factor into the value of that property?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so, if it's a valid arm's length transaction.
Right.
One thing I would say to that is I don't think that one sale constitutes a market. I think you look at, you know, a group of sales to constitute a market. So there's cases where that sale could be very representative. You know, what was paid could be very representative of the value. And there's going to be parcels that sell higher or lower than what, you know, what the appraiser thinks it's worth.
Well, I understand that you're trying to come up with a universal number, but there are a lot of properties that in a given year don't sell. I mean, the vast majority of properties don't sell.
Right.
But if they do sell, I mean, that seems to me it ought to be the number one factor.
I think there should be a lot of weight put into it, yeah. And if it's a valid sale, if it's a valid transaction, and there's a criteria that counties will use. I would like to say they review every sale that comes through to see for its validity, whether it's a vacant lot, other improvement sale, a home sale, a commercial sale. Not all of them pass the criteria for various reasons. But yeah, I would say there's a high correlation between sale prices and the value of that property.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Say, when you talk about valuation appeals, how does something get to the Board of Tax Appeals,
Well,
BOTA? Sorry.
excuse me?
The BOTA, the
Yeah,
Board of
BOTA.
Tax Appeals. Yeah.
Well, it has to be appealed. They have to engage in the appeal process, and I think the rules for ag property are a little bit different. I think they go straight to the board. I'm not 100% sure on that. But take a home. They engage in the appeal process, and they need to stay engaged in the appeal process. Unfortunately, they might have to go through an informal, maybe a small claims, and to actually get to the full board. So, yeah, it's a multi-step process, I think, to get there.
Well, I mean, you talked, I'm sorry, just to follow up. So you talked in your summary about the informal appeal, right? And then they could pay them under protest. I just didn't know what avenue got them further into the process that they would end up there.
Yeah, now, let me just clarify that you get a chance to appeal at the informal level or pay your taxes under protest, one or the other within a given tax year. And then, if you're not happy with the results, that's when you could appeal on to the small claims, to the Board of Tax Appeals.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just to follow up along his question, do you know the average time frame it takes to get through the Board of Tax Appeals?
It's pretty lengthy right now, just because of the backlog, and I know just from things I've heard, the BOTA is struggling with staffing. I know there's appeals. I think I've heard appeals being scheduled a couple of years out. So
a couple years out. Representative Sanders, a couple of years out. Yep. So during that time, they keep paying under protest? Is that the way that would have to work? Or is that, once that appeal is put in place, is that tax bill kind of put on hold, or what's the taxpayer doing?
I believe it is, yeah. And I know that's an issue too, the fees or the interest. I think that's what came up in some conversations, the interest that has to be paid, yeah.
Representative Essex?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I have two quick questions, if that's all right. So have protests come in more often than in the last 5 years, let's say, than they have? I mean, has the number come in?
I don't specifically track appeals, so I don't know. But obviously, I think everybody knows there's been some significant value increases over the last 3 years. And to say that they've had more appeals in this time frame than what they've had before, I can't really tell you.
Okay.
I don't know.
Second question, if I may. So I hear often from constituents that there's one house on the block that just got redone, remodeled, lived just beautiful, right? And that it's affected their values and their opinion. Can you walk me through what they do when there's one house that's the shining star and how that affects values for the rest of the people?
I guess I don't know that would necessarily be true. I think, if you go through a neighborhood and there's a revitalization plan in place and people are fixing properties up and they've brought the condition of the neighborhood up, I could see where the value of those properties would be worth more, perhaps. I wouldn't say that one property being remodeled or revamped in a neighborhood brings up the property values of other properties. And I'm assuming when you say that, perhaps that parcel was remodeled and then sold for a higher amount. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah. Well, if it's a valid transaction, it would, they would probably use it in the sales analysis. What I would say to that is maybe that's not the norm for the neighborhood. If they did a lot of work to a property and it's better than the rest of the properties, maybe there needs to be some adjustments to that. The data on that property, such as the depreciation factor or the desirability. We call it the CDU. It's condition, desirability, and usefulness, but it's a depreciation factor. So I think, and it also affects, it can affect the sales comparison approach as well. So, you know, that's what I would say. I think perhaps there needs to be an adjustment there. I don't think that necessarily brings up the values of all the properties in an area. When you start seeing more of those types of properties, if properties that are the norm for the neighborhood are selling, then I would, and they're selling higher, then I think you might be seeing a trend that things are selling higher. But if what you're saying is this property's had a lot of work done to it and sold, I don't necessarily believe that significantly affects the value of other homes in the neighborhood of a lesser quality or a lesser desirability.
I think sometimes the perception is, well, my neighbor remodeled their home and my taxes went up, so my taxes went up because they remodeled their home, and that's not always the
Very well could be
case.
just the perception, yeah.
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 Representative Clayton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is going just a little bit off of what Representative Essex said. I think in committee I can name you. I think we're okay with this. But so she was talking about remodeling a home. Does this also apply, or can you walk me through what is the difference between, so for instance, in my district, there are a great deal of homes, older homes that are torn down, and then a completely new home is built, and whether this is true or not, it is certainly the perception that that has caused an adverse issue when it comes to valuations of other homes that have not been updated in any way. So can you speak to more about complete tear downs and rebuilds?
Well, I don't. You're saying they're tearing a house down to rebuild in the same location?
Yes.
Yeah. I know it's happened, and I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I'm thinking, you know, they're tearing the house down because they don't feel like it has the value to remain there, and maybe the highest and best use is to tear it down and rebuild. As far as the value goes, I really can't.
Yeah, because there is, again, the perception, so take Old Leawood, for example, and I know that a lot of you are not from Johnson County, but so there will be neighborhoods where there are, you know, older ranch houses that were built in the 50s, they're lovely. Someone will buy, whether it is a builder or whether it is the homeowner, will either owns the land or purchases the land, levels the old ranch house, and then builds a, you know, $2.3 million home. Then there is the perception, whether, I'm asking you if this is reality, if that has an adverse effect on the values of the existing homes there, because that certainly seems to be the way that my constituents see it. I just want to hear what your thoughts are on that. And I get it, everyone wants to move to House 19. I would highly recommend it, and they want a larger house there. So I get it, but also walk me through how that affects valuations.
Well, you know, I think there comes a point when there's tear downs and rebuilds being done, and there's multiple tear downs. And eventually, maybe there's a conversion going on through the neighborhood, and you have a mix of both now. I would guess that perhaps maybe those lower quality homes are maybe going to be valued a little bit higher, but I can't say that. I have not been involved in, I have not seen it. I haven't been experiencing what you're talking about in Leawood or any other jurisdiction for that matter. I mean, I know it's happening. I don't know the specifics. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you.
I would speculate if the free market is functioning the way we think it would as those older homes, unless it's all current owners that are tearing them down and rebuilding, you know, as those older homes are purchased, you know, if the neighborhood becomes more attractive and a more progressive neighborhood, the prices of those valid sales of those older homes might be increasing, and that might be increasing some of the homes that are still in existence.
I think that would be probably the general perception, you know, but yeah, I don't have any, I mean, I don't see it. I don't play out there with the county appraisers every day, you know, so, yeah.
Yes. Question for Representative Cartland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while we're on that topic, and I don't know, I wouldn't have asked it had this not been asked, but to finance a rebuild or remodel, there is at least in my kids' experience in another state, the bankers have different interest rates and different criteria for a rebuild and a remodel. And you can go almost all the way down and it can be a remodel, and you can, I mean, you know, is there a difference in valuation prices if it's a remodel or a rebuild?
And I'm sorry, a difference in what?
Well, tear down, rebuild is one category and remodel is another. And a remodel can be done almost to the, you know, bare, but there's a level for bank loans. So I'm wondering if that affects the value, because I don't know, the valuation that an appraiser would do.
Are you asking me if the bank loans make a difference in the value? The interest rate being charged?
No, I'm not. I'm asking if in Kansas, do we assess the value of a home that's been remodeled the same amount, same increase in value as a tear down and rebuild? The banks have a different, in some states, in this state, I know, but different valuation, different interest rate for those projects. Does it affect our valuation if it is a tear down or a remodel?
Well, I think I would say that, you know, if they're doing a tear down and a rebuild, then I'm thinking 100% of the property or the structure is new, correct? Where if you're doing a remodel, at least the basic infrastructure of the house, I don't know what the extent of the remodel would be, but I would think at least the infrastructure would be in place, and it would be an older infrastructure, right? So I think you're talking about one that you know, is new, and one is not as new. It might have some new features to it, but it's not new like the rebuild is.
Thank you, if I might. I guess I'm asking, is there a difference in the value that an appraiser would use one from another? And we can find that out later. That's my question, though.
You know, I would tend to think so, just based on the age criteria. You know, everything's new in this house. Likely everything's not new in a remodel. You know, so I would think so.
Okay,
I mean,
but you don't know.
Generally speaking.
And you don't know the difference that is on the books about that, which I'll ask an appraiser about it. Thank you.
I don't.
Thank you, Mesh.
Sorry.
All right, committee, any further questions? I just had one, Bob. I would assume if taxpayers have questions about their appraisal, first stop is their county appraiser's office. If they are not getting the answers that they need from the county appraiser, is there someone at PVD that they can contact? Who is the best person for them to?
You know, when I get calls from taxpayers, I always ask them, have you talked to your county appraiser? That's 50-50, yes and no. So I always direct them to the county appraiser. If they've met with the county appraiser already and they're not seeming to have any luck, maybe they've had an informal hearing. If they haven't had an informal hearing, I steer them towards the appeal process. That's what the appeal process is there for. And so I try to do that. If they're in the appeal process and they haven't had any luck with it, or they don't feel like they're getting anywhere, I encourage them to stay engaged. You know, when you go to an informal appeal, your appeal is with the county appraiser or a county appraiser's representative. When you go to the small claims division, you're being heard by a hearing officer that's not the county appraiser. So you have a taxpayer, a county appraiser, and a hearing officer. So there's really an independent decision being made, and it's not the county appraiser. So I try to explain that to taxpayers and say, you know, the small claims or the next even BOTA, the next level will get you to here, to not meeting with the appraiser. And sometimes that, you know, they think about that and think that's a good idea to do that. If they contact the county, and we get a lot of calls, if they contact the county, they're not getting the answer they want or they feel like they need, you know, the next step is probably to give us a call if they've, you know, especially if they've engaged in the appeal process. And what we can do is hear them and maybe provide some direction. But I try to funnel them to that appeal process. That's what you guys have it in place for, and you know, it's effective, I think.
Yeah, I know I've sent some ag land questions your way in recent years, and I think they get much better information, more trusted information. You guys do a great job of alleviating a lot of the concerns. I'm not saying they're always happy with the result, but at least they understand how the result got to where it is. So I do appreciate the assistance that you provide. Thank you for your presentation, Bob. If there's any further questions, we'll maybe circle back with him at a later time, but in the interest of time, we'll move on. So thank you very much for your time. Committee, at this time, I'll turn to the reviser. We postponed a briefing on our Kansas Open Meetings and Open Records Act. Before we get too far into working bills and having hearings, just wanted to give the reviser a chance to give us all a good refresher. Doesn't matter how long you've been here or if you're brand new. It's always good to hear this information and make sure that we're complying with open meetings and records.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chair said, I'll here to prepare a short discussion of the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act as it applies to the legislator and this committee. The first main point is that if anybody has any issues dealing with COMA or a core request, if they bring them to our office's attention as timely as possible, CORE especially has a 3-day requirement to respond. Our office can help you prepare responses and deal with the situation. So please alert myself or anyone in my office as quickly as possible. Starting with the Kansas Open Meetings Act, also referred to as COMA. The Kansas Open Meeting Act applies to legislative and administrative bodies and any subordinate bodies created thereunder. As such, the COMA applies to the Kansas legislators, committees, and subcommittees unless a specific House or Senate rule would create an exemption. What does the COMA require? Essentially, the COMA requires two things: that meetings be open to the public and that notice of meetings be provided if requested. When meetings are open to the public, that means the public must have access to the meeting, and that when notice be provided, and especially in legislative situations, the committee chair usually designates to the committee assistant the ability to provide notice to individuals requesting notice. Under COMA, the statute is interpreted broadly, and if any question arises, the Attorney General or the District Attorney may investigate any issues. An important question under COMA, is determining whether a meeting exists. Under COMA, a meeting means any gathering or assembly via any method of interactive, which is two-way communication, and this includes electronic communication, or that occurs at any location or social situation involving a majority of the voting members for the purpose of engaging in a discussion, which would be a two-way dialogue about the business of the body. There's also a concern that serial communications could unintentionally create a meeting, and this would be where a meeting would also include interactive communications in a series, which are not contemporaneous, if the communications collectively involve a majority of the membership, they share a common topic of discussion concerning its business or affairs, and are intended by any participant to reach an agreement on a matter that would require binding action to be taken by the body. As I stated, interactive communication could include any form of communication, which would also include electronic communication. And the real issue with these interactive communication is that a meeting could be held, but there would be no notice provided, and the public would not have access to view the meeting. A few common COMA examples that I'll run through quickly are social events or travel are generally not meetings. If the business of the body is not discussed by a majority of the members of the body. However, always be aware of potential appearances of COMA violations, just to keep that on your mind. Attending an educational convention or listening to another meeting of another body is not a meeting if no discussion involving the majority of the members of the body's business occurs. Social media or email interactions could constitute a meeting. However, a one-way email generally does not. And that to avoid potential issues, we always advise warnings not to reply all or to do a BCC to members so that way they can't inadvertently reply to any sort of email communication to all members. Discussions solely limited to when and where when to meet is generally not considered a meeting under COMA. However, further discussions concerning potential agenda items could be considered a meeting. And lastly, this is kind of an important point, informal discussions before, during, or at recess of a meeting could constitute a kind of a sub-meeting and should always be considered if too many individuals would be involved in the discussion. Under the first COMA requirement, ensuring that a meeting is open, this generally is interpreted to mean reasonably accessible to the public in light of the circumstances. Generally, there's not much of an issue up here at the State House. All of our meetings are open to the public unless closed during an executive session. So that's generally not an issue with the legislator. A prior agenda may be changed at a meeting. If a change to the agenda is anticipated prior to a meeting, the best practice is to note the possible change and issue a revised agenda, which is commonly done. Recording or videotaping is generally allowed, however, subject to reasonable rules. There is no requirement under COMA that the public be permitted to speak or participate. And that COMA also does not require minutes. However, legislators' rules, except for executive session, but however, legislators' rules are generally do require minutes be taken. Under the second kind of main COMA requirement is that proper notice. Notice has to be provided, the date, time, and place must be provided to individuals who request it. As I stated earlier, the chair of the committee has the ability to delegate that responsibility to staff members. And that notice under COMA has to be reasonable in the manner and timing under the circumstances. That's kind of the general interpretation of how and when notice has to be provided. So essentially, dealing with the legislator and the time commitments up here, just as quickly as possible is generally our advice to get notice out. Moving on to the application of the Kansas Open Records Act. This is the statutory section that requires public records of a public agency to be open for inspection. CORA applies to public agencies, and under this definition, the committee, legislative committees, and any subcommittees would fall under the definition of a public agency. However, I would note that this applies to the committee records. Records of individual legislators are generally exempt from CORA request as they fall under the exception that records of an individual legislator are not public records under CORA. Responding to a CORA request, records are required to be made available or provide a response provided within 3 business days after such CORA request is made. This is the hard 3 business day time periods to get a response back to a requestor. Such response comes from the official custodian of the public agency. It's a hard 3 days, so we want to make sure that if anyone receives a CORA request, please bring it to our attention. The records that are required to be disclosed under CORA, it's pretty broad. It's all records shall be open for inspection. And that includes any recorded information regardless of form, so it's pretty broad. However, as everyone's aware, there are certain exceptions under CORA. One of them kind of is that public records do not include records made, maintained, or kept by members of the Kansas legislature. However, generally, records of the legislative committees, which includes testimony, handouts, and proposed amendments, are deemed public records once a majority of the members of a committee has access to such records. Excuse me. Moving on to COMA and CORA enforcement. both statutory acts provide for a civil penalty not to exceed $500 for each violation if anyone found to have violated it. So it is a pretty severe penalty. However, it also, in lieu of bringing a action, the Attorney General can bring what are called consent orders entered into with an offending party. And then lastly, the district attorney or AG may also require training if certain violations are found. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. I don't know how many times I've sat through these presentations, and I just realized, there are times as a committee chair, I don't know that I've ever actually went out and talked to every single member of the committee, but I'm trying to determine support for a bill and whether we're going to work a bill in committee or just leave it set. Is it a violation for me to just simply ask if they are supporting the bill or if they would like to see it, or is that considered does that constitute communication on the, because we're really just talking about the agenda, I'm not discussing the content, but if I go to one member and they say, don't like this bill, go to another member, yeah, I'd like to get it out of committee, am I in violation there if I do something like that to every single member or a majority of the members?
Mr. Chair, while it kind of goes to the serial communication aspect of it and whether or not there's intended by a participant to reach an agreement on the matter that would require binding action. So if you would satisfy that element, there could be an issue. Just discussions with individuals, broadly would probably not have any impact.
Committee, any questions for the reviser? Yes, Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Siebers. I had a quick question. You may have touched on this and I missed it, but we as a legislature, we have our caucus meetings, Republican, Democrat, and I'm just wondering what is the exception or how that takes place without having the public involved? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, generally, it's my understanding, most caucus meetings are generally open. There is an exception under under COMA. We're talking about COMA here. Under the COMA statute, the authority has been granted to both the House and the Senate to create rules to either exempt out or follow different standards than COMA. One of the rules is that both the majority leader and the minority leader can close caucus meetings. So that's, if they decide they just can close it, that's one way. Otherwise, I believe caucus meetings are generally open to the public to attend, but unless they're closed. But there is a special exemption for rules, and certain times I do know that those have been used.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you again, Adam, unless you want to just stand up there because we'll be opening up the hearing for House Bill 2011, and the first item of that is a summary by the reviser. So welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. House Bill 2011 would decrease the rate of ad valorem tax imposed by a school district from the current 20 mills to 18.5 mills for the 2025-2026 school year, and commencing in the school year 2026-2027 and all school years thereafter. The rate of tax to be levied would equal the tax rate for that current school year that would generate the same property tax revenue as would be levied for the 2025-2026 school year using the current tax total assessed valuation. So essentially, the 2025-2026 school year, the amount of tax brought in would then be used to calculate the rate going forward. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any question.
Thank you, Adam. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to confirm, so during the special session, we changed the valuation from 42 and change it up to 75. And I believe we put in what's called a demand transfer to backfill that for the schools. Would that apply to this as well? Would that cover this as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I looked at that before. It was brought to my attention, and that only applied to the residential exemption as it's currently drafted. A provision would have to be incorporated to pick up something like this, but that currently just applies to that residential exemption as that section is currently drafted, and this would not currently implicate that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Representative, I'll take the blame for that because when we had this in our bill last year, we were reducing the mill levy. I was under the assumption that it was built to accommodate a reduction in the mill levy too, but it's my full intention to backfill that and make that a demand transfer. So I'll be working on that amendment.
Appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
Representative Shu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on this bill and kind of a little bit of what Bob went over earlier and the different assessment rates, is it an accurate statement to say that kind of a flat mill decrease like this, just 1.5 mil decrease and then the adjustments later, does that make our tax code more regressive?
I'm not sure if a regressive question would be for the reviser. I mean, it's kind of a matter of opinion on regressive taxes, unless you want to rephrase the question a little bit. I'm just not sure if the reviser could provide you an answer on that.
Fair enough. Yeah, the point I was just making is kind of like ag land and businesses get assessed at a higher rate than residential. And so kind of to me, I guess I'm opining more than asking a question. It seems to me that kind of a flat mill decrease benefits them more. And then if we're backfilling it kind of with SGF, that means we're spreading out more of it to every taxpayer as well. So I guess more opining than a question then.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. Would like to turn to the Department of Revenue for an overview of the fiscal note. Welcome to committee, Kathleen.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. For House Bill 2011, we are estimating a decrease in revenues to the State School District Finance Fund in the amount of $67.4 million in fiscal year 26, $113.8 million in fiscal year 27, and $162.4 million in fiscal year 28.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Sawyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the 67 sounds right, what I expected. I'm a little surprised how much it goes up in 26 and 27. So the revenue neutral makes a significant difference. I mean, that's more than a mill, more reduction each year, if I'm doing that right in my head. Is that, yeah, that's what you did. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of that, because new construction isn't accounted for, growth, things like that. So we're probably anticipating, you know, as it is right now, we receive all that new construction and growth. The way it's written in the bill right now, it's kind of a fixed dollar amount. That could be why it grows so quickly.
We have accounted for growth of around 4.5% in here, and new construction is also in here as well.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you again, Kathleen. This time we'll turn to our testimony and open up the proponent section. Have first listed as before the committee, John Donnelly with the Kansas Farm Bureau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am John Donnelly, and I'm here today on behalf of the 30,000 voting members of the Kansas Farm Bureau across the state of Kansas. You have my written testimony in front of me. I've tried not to make a practice of reading that, but suffice it to say we're supportive of this bill for all the good things that were just described about it. As you'll recall, last year we came in and testified in favor of a general broad-based property tax mill rate reduction, and ultimately the legislature passed that. It did not become law. There was lots of blame going around as to whose fault that was, and well, we thought, well, we're going to give you guys another chance to do it again, because we are, quite frankly, we were we enjoyed the fact, or we were pleased with the fact that the legislature was finally taking up broad-based property tax relief. I made the comment in the Senate hearing on a different subject that, you know, I don't even really have to set a legislative calendar anymore. It seems like that the middle of January on odd-numbered years, I know I'm going to be testifying in front of the tax committee and talking about how all we heard about during the last election was that we need to reduce property taxes. I've been through 10 election cycles, been doing this for about 20 years. We don't really ever reduce property taxes. We talk about it a lot. I think the last time, as I recall, was when we went from 35 to 27 mills and then down to 27 to 20 mills. I don't remember the year, but it was before I was here. So I just, number one, applaud the committee for actually looking at broad-based property tax relief. I think it's long overdue. There have been some complicating factors with court cases, et cetera, in the past on the 20 mills, but I think, you know, that's somewhat settled. And with the demand transfer intent that I know the chairman and that was discussed earlier, I think we can avoid some of those potential problems as well, should the legislature decide to go that route. But you have Kansas Farm Bureau's full-throated support of broad-based property tax relief, and we really appreciate the fact that we're looking at this across all property taxpayers and not just certain property classes. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm a little confused about phraseology here. You're calling it property tax relief, which is what it seems to me it is, but yet in the bill, it's talking about ad valorem tax. So could I get an explanation either from you, Mr. Chair, or from the conferee about what the difference between, if any, between property tax and ad valorem tax?
I'll just say this, ad valorem equals property, I think is the simplest way to explain it. So yeah.
6 of one, half dozen of another.
Somebody liked Latin at some point in our history, so.
All right, thank you.
I had a question. If you're representing your Farm Bureau members, they're ag producers predominantly. I'm assuming we have some business owners. Has anyone done the math on how much this would save them versus how much, you know, as Representative Hsu had alluded to, it's kind of a tax shift. I mean, this is going to be property tax relief that's subsidized by income and sales tax at the state level. Has anybody actually tried to put numbers to that on how much relief this would actually amount to?
Boy, I've not went and looked at it. I will tell you it's not enough, as you hear from everyone that's looking for property tax or any tax relief. No, I don't know the exact number on that. That's a great question. I think we could probably work with the Department of Revenue and come up with that number. Probably, I would think we could do it by class type even, which I think would be helpful for the discussion. I have not researched that, though, at this point in time.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, I'd like to welcome Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association, and I'll be brief. Our policy supports property tax relief. We think that reducing the statewide mills, of which there's 21 and a half, and this is 20 of them, is the best, most direct way to provide that relief across all classes of property. As many of you may know, on average, about 83% of the mills are assessed at the local level. So these are the mills in your control, and if you want to give property tax relief, this is the best way to do it. We'd also mention the revenue neutral effect. You've asked counties and cities to do that, and we think it'd also be smart to do that on the statewide mills as well. So that, Mr. Chair, happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. That's all the proponents that I had speaking before the committee. We also have some written testimony. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent on House Bill 2011? Yes, Mr. Murray.
Thank you. My apologies. I intended my testimony to be in support in person, so I apologize for that, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to stand up. My name is Dan Murray. I'm here today on behalf of the National Federation of Independent Business. We're the voice of small business in Kansas, representing over 3,600 small business owners across the board, a lot of whom are ag producers, but also retailers and construction and manufacturers as well. This is the top priority for our members. I think you all heard this at the doorstep. Issue 1, 2, and 3 were property tax relief. This fits in line. Indeed, last year we supported the efforts on behalf of the legislature to reduce the statewide mill levy, and we stand by in support of that. Ahead of this session, we balloted our members, and over 88% endorsed this reduction. And in that question that we asked our members was the caveat that it would be backfilled with a demand transfer. So I think that's an important piece of this. We don't want to jeopardize the stream of funding for K-12, et cetera. But with that, I appreciate the opportunity to stand up in person and look forward to working with you on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. I got a question for you. It's similar to
I stood up and I knew I'd take a question, so no, go ahead.
Similar to what I asked Mr. Donnelly. You represent businesses. Was any part of your survey, or was there any discussion on the fact that if we provide this property tax relief, it is basically subsidized by income tax and sales tax, so it makes it harder to reduce those rates or provide relief in those categories later on if we pass this measure?
It was not asked. I can kind of maybe anecdotally respond. I think property taxes has been at the top of our issue list for years in terms of things that we want to address. Last year, some significant steps were taken on the income tax side, and we appreciate, and that certainly 75% of our members are pass-through business owners, meaning they file at the individual level. So that individual income tax relief was something certainly that was appreciated. Federal income taxes remain a source of concern, and tax complexity is a problem as well. Compliance with the complex system that we have both at the state and federal level are something that small business owners contend with. They don't have in-house counsel that kind of helps them with this, but certainly recognizing that we've seen some relief on the income side. I think it's time now that our members have said property taxes is certainly, it's the time now to address that. So I don't think I answered your question. I certainly listened to Mr. Donnelly's response and agree with him in terms of the impact. I can't tell you what that would be from member to member and the type of business that they have, but it would be significant and appreciated.
Thank you. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. At this time, we'll move on to the opponent. I don't show, we have written opponent testimony. Is there anyone wishing to appear before the committee as an opponent? Okay, seeing none, we will go to neutral testimony, and I am showing Shannon Kimball. Welcome to committee as a neutral testimony.
Thank you, Chair Smith and members of the committee. My name is Shannon Kimball. I am here today representing the Kansas Association of School Boards. I'm a government relations specialist with the association. I appreciate the opportunity to provide neutral testimony today on House Bill 2011. Our members, through our member-adopted legislative priorities, have asked us to advocate to you on their behalf for tax policy that provides sustainable and reliable funding for public schools, and also property tax relief efforts that do not imperil school funding. We have 3 items we wanted to highlight for the committee. The first one, there's been some discussion about already related to the demand transfer issue and the school district finance fund. We thank you for including that in last year's property tax relief provision that was passed in the special session, and for considering that as part of your work on this bill. It's very important because that school district finance fund is in state law solely dedicated to funding public schools. So it's the one place where that money is dedicated, and it would be really important to our members to maintain the integrity of that protection for public school funding. In our written testimony, we raise a couple of other items for your consideration. First, the issue of what happens with new construction that takes place in districts with this bill freezing the revenue collection at the 25-26 school year level. If you add new construction to a district and don't increase the base, we think that that could be something that should be considered, that you could broaden that base over time with new development, and we would support that change in the bill. And then finally, the amount collected under the statewide levy would be frozen in time. And as the Kansas Supreme Court has made clear in defining what a suitable school funding model looks like for our state, they have said that we must adjust school funding to account for rising costs over time. So thus you get the inflation adjustment that is built into the school finance formula. We think it would be appropriate to consider that as part of an inflation factor in this bill over time. That way it would protect the integrity of the three-legged stool so that you wouldn't have the property tax leg become so short that the stool falls over eventually as that change happens over time. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share these thoughts with you, and I would be happy to stand for questions if appropriate.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and take questions now. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does your organization have any proposed amendments?
We understand that there have been discussions about the demand transfer language, and we would want to rely on the revisor to specifically address how to work that into the statute. The current statute, 72-5133A, that has the demand transfer language from last session, it looks like it would need to be tweaked, and so that would be, I would defer to the revisor and the chair on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions, committee? He's pondering. Representative Avercamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might be for the revisers, but talk about the demand transfer and, you know, the courts kind of taking over appropriations for schools. If the legislature is just going to do what the courts say as far as funding schools, what's the need for the demand transfer? Why do we need the language if the courts are telling us what we're going to pay schools? Aren't we going to, if we're surrendering the appropriations to the courts, there's a guaranteed amount of money going to the schools, period. So what's the need for the demand transfer?
You're exactly right, and that's why last year was the first time that was ever put in. If you recall, when we increased that from 20,000 to 40,000 back in 22 is when that was. When I visited with our Representative Waymaster through appropriations, that transfer automatically happened because you're right. We are guaranteeing the amount that we're funding for school finance, whatever, because we can't control how much comes in from valuation increases or decreases or mill levies. So whatever the difference is has always traditionally been transferred. We put this language in last year just to make 100% certain that that was the legislative intent. Actually doesn't have any impact because it always has been done. We just wanted to guarantee 100% that was in statute to clarify legislative intent. But you're exactly right. It isn't really necessary because it happens anyway because of the Supreme Court case.
If I may, Chair, could
Yes.
I add to that? It's important also because the school district finance fund, like I said, there's statutory language that dedicates that money to school finance. When you take money out of the state general fund, the school finance formula basically says if you don't appropriate the amount of money that the school finance fund calls for out of state general fund, the result of that for school districts is that you basically essentially get a cut on the base state aid when it's distributed to schools. So this is a way to ensure that those dollars in that school district finance fund are protected, and it protects school districts from that kind of cut in base state aid.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a fiscal note that's been developed for this bill yet?
Yes, we just heard from Kathleen Smith earlier. She covered the fiscal note.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Next conferee, I'd like to welcome Timothy Graham.
Hello. Ready?
Yes, go
All
ahead.
right.
Sorry.
Hey, thanks for allowing me to testify today, members of the committee. Welcome back to the 2025 legislative session. My name is Tim Graham. I work for KNEA. I am their Director of Government Relations and Legislative Affairs. You'll see in the first couple paragraphs of my testimony who we are, who we represent, and you can briefly read about some of the resolutions we have dealing with tax policy, the state of Kansas. Let me start out by saying that KNEA is not opposed to property tax relief, and we will leave it up to the will of the body of the legislature and of this committee to decide what you want to do on tax. But what we want to do is we want to offer a strong word of caution that when you reduce the statewide mill levy from 20 to 18.5 mills, this is a direct reduction to revenue that is specifically reserved for public education, as conferees have said before me. If you add to this other proposals that have passed the legislature last year, like the one that we talked about, or that's been talked about earlier today, the exemption being raised from $42,000 to $80,000 on the homestead exemption, or if you talk about proposals that are currently being considered by this legislature, like constitutional amendments to freeze property tax valuations, one could reasonably argue that there could be a significant erosion in revenues that are critically important to public education. In talking to several of you, I understand that that's not the intent, and we appreciate it. I echo the comments of the conferee before me that was very appreciative of the demand transfer language that went into the bill last year, or went into the bill in the special session. But we want to make sure that that is represented in this bill as well, for all the reasons that you heard before. Now, in talking to Chairman Smith before the committee, it's my understanding that he'll be bringing a amendment to this committee, and we ask that you guys support that amendment. We are neutral on this bill because of the understanding that the demand transfer will be in the final legislation. That's critically important for us. I'll skip over the next two paragraphs, but I want to go to my last paragraph, and I want to stress this. We understand that the legislature has targeted property tax relief as one of its top priorities this session. We do not wish to step in the middle of that debate. With that understanding, KNEA wants to stress that public education cannot afford the type of financial hit that would occur if the legislature went too far in its approach to tax policy. We've done that as a legislature several times in the last 25 years. That may sound like a cheap shot at the last administration. It's not. The legislature has gone too far when both Democrats and Republicans have occupied the second floor, and we've always had to come back and make up for it later when public education starts to get shortened. So we want to issue that word of caution. We want to ask you guys to put in language that would address the shortfall that would occur with this type of policy, and we look forward to working with you as this process moves forward.
Thanks, Tim. I just personally want to thank you for bringing it to my attention that the actual wording that was passed in Senate Bill 1 did not actually include the reduction for the mill levy, so thank you for bringing that to my attention.
I had a lot of people bring that to my attention, so I had help with that.
Okay, committee, further questions. Representative Awerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Graham, so kind of similar question. So it seems like the courts have taken over appropriation for schools, and the legislature surrendered that to them. So whatever the courts tell the legislature we need to pay schools, we're going to pay schools. So if we do reduce the tax revenues coming to the state, and we don't increase taxes, in theory, if we keep doing what we're doing, the schools will get their money. It's just a reduction of what we can spend on all the other responsibilities of the state. So what's the concern from the KNEA on school dollars spent? Because the courts are really telling the legislature what to do. Are you worried more that the legislature is going to take back their power of appropriations on schools? I'm not seeing the connection between, because of the current situation with the courts telling the legislature what we have to spend, I don't see the connection with the opposition.
Well, you guys hold the purse strings, right? I mean, you're the appropriators. The court has given up jurisdiction to this case, and quite frankly, we have a lot of anxiety of what's happened in the past 25 years with school funding. So we're trying to ensure that we can point out to future legislatures what the legislative intent was on these types of bills. This was not an attempt to cut funding. It was an attempt to lower property taxes. Are we in a staring contest?
No, we're not. So you made the statement, the legislature appropriates the dollars, we control the purse string. So are you saying that it's wrong for the courts to tell the legislature?
I'm not going to get into that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any further questions? See none. Thank you for your testimony. That concludes what I had appearing before the committee. We do have several neutral written testimonies. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a neutral conferee for House Bill 2011? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close the hearing. And I did want, Kathleen, I didn't know if you wanted to address the committee. Word for our tour tomorrow, where do we need to show up?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, if you are planning on attending the tour tomorrow, you will go to the Zabel Building, which is at 300 Southwest 29th Street. And there is a main door for vehicle entrance. You're going to go to the left or to the north of that door, and it's more of an employee entrance, and that's the door you're going to enter. Someone will have to be there, and that will probably be me, waiting for you, because you're not going to be able to get in without me, because it's a key card. So I'll be able to let you in. And Leah has collected all the confidentiality oaths. Okay. So we should be good to go. So tomorrow we'll just meet there at 3:30. Okay.
Yes, excellent. All right. That concludes our business for the day. Thank you for your attention, committee, and we are adjourned.